I'm Luke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is Mixed to Tape,
the podcast where we talk about audio, from recording to mastering and everything else in between.
We're here to start discussions and help answer your questions.
Let's get started.
So today we're doing something different. Hello, Alex.
Hello, Luke.
No Tyler this week. Tyler is out. He's very busy, and he's also going on vacations or something. So, Alex, I called on you, my good friend, Alex Perialas, former head of the SRT program at Ithaca College, and just all around just generic, general, badass audio engineer.
Very generic, yes, thank you.
We were just discussing this. You've been engineering for, I still haven't done the math quite yet, but it's
you don't do the math.
It's a while. You've been doing this for a while. You have a studio here in Ithaca that you manage called Pyramid Sound, and you've also kind of been all over. You've worked in New York City, and didn't I remember you went to like London at one point?
Yeah, I was worked in Europe, Holland, France, Germany, everywhere but the places I really wanted to go, like Italy and Greece, Spain, places that I really wanted to go. But no, it's been fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming by. We're gonna talk about audio, which I know you're okay with.
I'll be okay with audio. Motorcycles, audio, all that, cars, things that go fast and things that are fun.
Things that might get loud. Yeah. Okay. We have a brief segment of In Case You Missed It today. So, Alex, in case you missed it, let me tell you. What?
I'm all ears. Tell me. Because you are the master of all things Apple. I learned that from working with you for many years. That you don't mess around.
So, for those of you who weren't paying attention, on Monday, June 9th, Apple held their Worldwide Developer Conference, WWDC, and announced a plethora of new updates to their operating systems from phones, iPads, and obviously their Mac operating system as well. The big announcement this time around was that they are partnering with the OpenAI ChatGPT platform, and they are pairing it with Siri and are essentially, turbocharging Siri all throughout your computer. So from an audio standpoint, I'm not quite sure what this means for us audio engineers, but it means that running emails is about to be a whole lot nicer, I think.
It made Elon angry for a minute.
Yeah.
Did you hear? Yeah, that was funny.
That made me happy. Anytime that man is angry, I'm a little bit happier.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But I saw some of these demos were kind of nuts. They have built into the operating system, you can type up an email and make it sound more concise or more professional, which is something I think I definitely have some trouble with. I don't know about you.
I always have trouble trying to make it not angry.
Yeah. They're trying to not make it sound quite so like you don't like the other person that much, and
even though it was really supposed to be really super friendly, I don't know why it always comes out the other way.
So yeah, luckily, I guess Siri is going to be there to help.
I mean, but Siri was the beginning of the. They had such a head start on everybody with Siri, and they just kind of sat on our hands.
They did
for a decade. They
did. Yeah, like. I think for Apple, their pledge to maintain user privacy more than their competitors, I think served as their biggest downfall in that area, because they just didn't have the user data to harvest. And so Google and Amazon launch ahead because they don't give a shit.
Yeah, they're all about the analytics. They just want to make sure that something's on your inbox that you didn't want, that you thought you needed. So,
I actually appreciated, now that we're talking about privacy, I guess, I did appreciate that Apple still included a privacy pledge in this announcement. That it sounds like, from what I was looking at, from what they advertised, this entire experience will be private, and if it does have to go to a third party, you are told explicitly every single time. And I kind of like that. So
Yeah.
I guess we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, that was some big news.
Yeah. But so that's our I guess our big tech news for the day. Let's move on to our topic. I'm very interested in talking about this topic with you, Alex, because you have been mixing a lot longer and you've been mixing a lot better records than me.
Yeah, I don't know. Wait, no, I don't know if you could call them better records. Just other records.
I've heard your drum sounds. You're great. So today, I thought we could start just talking about not mixing really, but starting a mix. Like kind of getting into that. Yeah, just getting into the mixing thing. I'd love to kick this to you first, actually. You know, when you are like sort of first getting started with a mix, what are some things that you like to think about first?
Well, for me, I mean, the biggest thing is to get my, my basic template that I have used for years on a large format console together. In other words, I kind of get my overview of my reverbs, my delays, the things that I'm going to use that, can be modulation devices as far as, outboard gear effects. And I like to have that whole part of it done and ready to go, so that if I have an idea during the process of the mix, that I can say, I wonder what it would sound like if I did a little chorusing on this, this little section. I could just go there and turn a knob and it would happen. And I think that came from the analog days of a large format console where you needed to patch things up, prior to the beginning of a mix. You wouldn't just add stuff as you went, because you wouldn't be efficient. So I guess it's akin to how we use templates these days in any DAW to have a place to start. So that's kind of paramount for me, is I want to have that. I've chosen kind of based on the style of the music, the tempo of the music, and sort of the vision of what the client has for the project, to make sure that those elements are ready to go. Like my vocal verb, my drum verb, my second drum verb, my utilitarian verb, my delays, multiple delays, and then things that I like to use, like in chorusings, chorus or flanges, or things that mess with a little bit of the pitch and time a bit. And I like to have all that stuff ready to go.
And you were kind of saying you'll have that selected based off of like genre and tempo. So you're thinking if it's like
Right.
a fast song, you have a different set of plugins and or hardware units that you're reaching for versus like a slower song.
Right. Well, back in the day, it was always about hardware, and these days it's so much easier to be more efficient.
Yeah.
Where I think a lot of young engineers just sort of slap stuff on as they go, which is not a bad thing, because it's a different world, right? It's easy. You just go to your palette of plugins and you go like, okay, verb, and whether people are doing it as a serial process, in the sense of it's in line, like it travels in and out of that plugin, and then you use the mix knob in the plugin as the way to control the reverb to the dry and wet signal, which I don't prescribe to as a way to do things. I like to make reverbs parallel, and processing like equalization and dynamics control to let those be serial, and all the other stuff is parallel. That's just the way I learned, and I still prescribe to that. But that doesn't mean that in the world of a DAW that you want to hear a reverb on something for one instance, that you don't just jump in and grab a reverb that you like and you just go and be done. So that's a whole nother way to look at it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of the beginnings of kind of like just getting that part of it sorted out so it's ready to go, so that you don't have to think about it. You just like, and I do things in the same way, like aux 1 on a console was always my vocal verb. Aux 2 was always my drum verb. Aux 3, and I worked that way for years and years, so that I didn't have to think. I could just grab a knob, and it was just there. And I do the same thing to this day in Pro Tools. It's just way easier.
I definitely have a bit of a hybrid, I think. I'll start with, there are certain reverbs I want, or I want available at least, and I will mute and or deactivate based off of what I'd like. But, having my EMT plate and my lexicon already loaded and already routed, all I have to do is, oh, I'd love some plate. Just route this vocal to the plate. There's a couple plugins that I always want on I use a master bus, or no, I use a stereo bus. I don't use a master bus. Actually, let me change gears a little bit and I think talk about that. For me, before I start mixing, I like to do a lot of session prep type work. So I'll go through and, set up my folder tracks, set up any kind of routing or just like sort of generic folders, label my tracks, group them, color them as needed. I've gone back and forth with this on some engineers, but I'm a big proponent of adding fades whenever there's an end to the clip, whenever there's a beginning to the clip, whenever there's a crossfade, even if it doesn't sound like it needs it. I used to not add fades when I was much, much, much younger. And then I remember thinking one time, like, man, this whole mix feels disjointed and I can't figure out why. I just mixed the whole thing. And I just went through and I added, start fades and end fades to every single track, and suddenly the whole thing just sounded cohesive. It makes a difference. The last thing I like to do is I'm a big proponent of the stereo bus. So a lot of kids, a lot of students, a lot of people getting started will just use the master fader in Pro Tools, which is essentially it's just a fader that's just controlling an output from Pro Tools, and you can slap some plugins in there. Whereas the stereo bus is it's an aux track, but it's one that I have dedicated to be the final aux track in the line of everything. Everything routes through there. The reason I do this is sort of twofold. One, on the master bus, the plugins that you select on the master bus are going to be post fader. So that means if I want to do a fade out of my song, it will fade out and then it will feed that into whatever plugins I have listed on the master bus. Whereas in a stereo bus, it's pre-fader. I also like the stereo bus because it allows me to print my songs, my mixes, into my session. And there are times where I actually prefer to do that rather than bouncing. I'm a big stereo bus guy.
No, I'm with that. I'm 100%. I mean, everything you described is exactly the next step, but for me, and you talked about fades. I mean, if you see one of my sessions, there is not one clip that is not cleaned up. Even if there's digital black between somebody's background vocal and then the next chorus is coming, that stuff's cleaned up. Mm-hmm. There is never a track that just runs continuously from the top to the bottom, even though there's no audio in a section. If there's no audio, it's cut out and there's a fade in and a fade out. I clip. I mean, every bit of everything is cut out.
Dude, even because of with batch fades that you have now, right? We have select a whole thing, hit Command F. Now just add a 50 millisecond fade to the beginning and end. Like, just do it. You can do a whole session in seconds.
Yeah, I manually still go in there.
I do too.
I tweak so hard on getting that stuff cleaned up. It's kind of ridiculous. And when somebody sees it, they're like, "That's a lot of work." I go, "Yeah, I know, but that's what you need to do." So that's what I like to do.
Yeah,
It's not that you have to do it that way. That's not a how-to. That's just how I do. So
this job is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Attention to detail.
The key for me was always to hand something to somebody, even in the analog days, that, because you'd punch in and punch out. There'd be a lot of stray stuff. I would go spot erase stuff so that if it went to the next person, they wouldn't have all of a sudden a snare or a guitar solo like note popping out of a track somewhere. I would make sure that my stuff was super clean and the track sheets were labeled, and I've carried that forward into my digital world. Even being an old guy at 68 years old, I try to stay current enough to make it right, and I still prescribe to that, so.
I can attest to, like, at top tier engineers in New York City, the younger generation are still, the mantra is the session when you hand it off to whoever you're handing it off to should be completely clean. Every fade should be done, groups should be done, everything should be colored, it should be so organized. Like, we also wouldn't have the stray random audio littered throughout because that's confusing when you hand it off to the next person. Why is this here? right? It could have been so easily deleted, so it must be here for a reason. And now you just created like hours of emails.
Well, I mean, I've always been a stickler for naming convention as well. I know you are too, and that's the one thing that is super important. And you try to make sure that young folks really understand how important it is to make sure that things are labeled. If the guitar player's name is Rob, and you just write Rob on the track, that if you were the one to track that and you're going to mix it, that's fine. But if it goes to somebody else, they don't know who Rob is, and it should say Rob could be in the comments or Rob can be in another set of notes. But if Rob's the guitar player, it should say guitar. It should say what track, where does it live? Is it guitar in the verse? Is it guitar in the chorus? There's all kinds of places to put comments in the DAWs these days. And
Rob underscore guitar.
There, I love you. That's who you are, Luke.
Because you know what? Because either I'm handing this off to somebody or I'm handing it off to myself like 6 months from now. I still don't know who Rob is 6 months from now, and I worked on the damn thing. So
Exactly. And quite frankly, when you get stuff from other people, it's crazy to see people that were paid real money to do stuff. And I'm not going to name names, but it's kind of nuts to see how sloppy some of the work is, and whether it was the assistant who should be shot because they're the last person in line that should be making sure that whoever they're working with is, if they're not dictating that it should be done that way, then you should take it upon yourself to be that person to make sure that stuff's clean and tidy, and you don't want to be, just want to be on your game because there's somebody else waiting for your job, or the opportunity for your job. So there's always somebody in line that's like waiting to take your chair and sharpen those pencils. So
audio.03.dupe.01 fired.
Nobody has to sharpen pencils anymore. So that was a bad intern joke. I'm so sorry.
They still sharpen in a power station.
Well, some things just never change.
Yep. Yeah. So session prep, we've harped on this for a little bit. Thinking about the mix, you actually had some really good suggestions before we started. So thinking about how the mix should sound going into it. You also sort of talked a little bit about this when you were thinking about what gear you're prepping for your mix. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to figure out the baseline of stuff because, the convention is going to be to start with drums. Most people start with drums, and a lot of young folks will sit there and work on a kick drum for 2 hours and then work on a snare drum for 4 more hours. And then they put the kick and snare together and they don't mean anything to the overheads or the room microphones, if there were room microphones. I always suggest this is now me, and this is something I tried to impart on kids that I see while I was there. Work fast, no EQ, and your first round of stuff should just be fader, levels, and panning. Mm-hmm. No EQ. Do not EQ one thing. No reverb yet. Dry. Do not send anything to any verbs or any delays. All that stuff is going to be the candy after this approach, and that is to work really quickly and put up a mix. Faders down, faders up, and start building something that sounds like music without anything else going on. No compression, no anything. Now, all that stuff is going to be after the fact. And try to get it roughed into something. And you should be able to do something I think in like 15 minutes. You should have something that resembles a song with no anything.
Do you try to go in with like a vision in your head, or are you listening to the instruments and sort of letting the mix sort of guide you?
I kind of let it guide me, but you have to make some hard decisions up front, right? What's the drum image going to be? Is it going to be kind of a mono thing? Is it that kind of a vibe? Is it kind of like, is it supposed to be pop and polished? Is it live drums? Is it samples? Is it loops? I mean, what are the sources? You kind of have to figure that part out early on, what's going on there. And I do believe that you have to figure out what the image is going to be. If it's live drums, what's the perspective? It's a right-handed drummer. Is it audience perspective in the panning? Is it like from the vision of the stage to from the audience to the stage, or is it drummer's perspective, like you're sitting behind the drum kit? Where are things going to be? And I say that the overheads are your best friends for that stuff. You should really look at the overheads and figure out if they're labeled properly. And if you know it's a right-handed drummer, then you probably want to know that the hi-hat is where it's supposed to be. And if there's a ride cymbal, the ride should be where it should be. And that should be your jump off, should be the overheads. And then you build the drum kit around the overheads. A lot of people just wind all the low end out of the overheads and turn them into cymbal microphones. And that's really, if they were put in the right spot in the room and the drummer was a good player and the room was decent, should be able to get a picture of the drum kit with the overheads and the kick drum. Should actually tell you a lot right there and there, So that perspective, I think, is important, whether it's drummer perspective or audience perspective. I mean, how do you, when you're dealing with live drums, say it's a rock session, then do you like to have the drum image to be audience perspective, or do you like it to be because there's a lot that goes on here now in drumland, right? Between correlation of all those microphones, there's going to be a lot of leakage. There's going to be timing, phase issues. There's going to be all that stuff going on between those microphones, and you can quickly kind of understand by working quickly. You can kind of understand where the problems are in a hurry, I think.
Honestly, most of the live drums I've done at this point are just mono overheads.
Okay.
But
even in the days, but you watch a lot of really high-end engineers and mixers
yeah.
at Avatar, and so
Most of the stuff I worked on or assisted on at least, seemed like it was audience perspective. Audience perspective
Yep.
has always felt like it makes the most sense to me because we are the audience, the listener is the audience. I feel like I'm gonna piss some people off here, but I feel like the only people who complain about drummers' perspective are drummers.
Well, here's a little factoid. In all those metal records I did, those are the only times I actually made the drummer's perspective,
Yeah.
because the kids like to play air drums, and that was a big thing. And
Yeah.
of course, in those days, it was big drum kits and lots of tom toms, and they had to, they were panning around and to kind of make your head spin. These days, I typically would not think about that ever again, but it was a thing.
Yeah.
So just a little factoid of drummer's perspective,
Yeah.
air drums.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and on that same token, like I can argue with myself here and say if the only people who are going to care are going to be the drummers, but let's just make the drummers happy that no one else gives a shit. Okay, so no, I've been a big audience perspective kind of guy, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of how I roll too. Anything else, but those we'll go back into the '80s or '90s. A lot of those records that I did, and that was just a choice I made for myself. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm saying I did that.
I don't think I ever saw jazz drums be anything other than audience perspective. I don't think I ever saw drummers perspective drums.
I'm pretty sure that's probably the case.
Yeah.
'Cause jazz is it's an audience
Yeah.
participation.
Yeah. Even in the like weird heady jazz stuff, it's still like audience perspective.
And let's get down to it really quickly and say that the creation that we make of a drum kit in recordings and mixes is a lie anyway, because drums don't sound anything like what we do to
Yeah.
them.
Thanks, Nirvana.
Drums don't sound like that. They just don't sound like that. Stand in a room with a drummer who's a good drummer in a room that's pleasing to listen to, and that's the way the drums sound.
Mm-hmm.
But when we put a kick drum mic up and two snare microphones, or maybe three, and another kick drum microphone, 3 feet from the beater head, and then there's another room microphone that's being slammed by a compressor later on in the mix, and all this stuff that we create from all these pieces, we create a lie of drums.
But it's
That's
a
not how
fun
drums sound.
lie.
It's an amazing
it's a
lie, and I
really
love
fun
it.
lie.
But there's no reality in the drum sounds that are on all the records that people love.
No, no, definitely not. Oh man, where's
Sorry, I know we're going down the rabbit hole here.
no, we're just. I'm loving it. We're like dipping. We're like going deep down these rabbit holes and then like popping our heads back up. So probably good to think about band. We've sort of danced around this one, but like think about has the band ever done anything before? Does the band have any inspiration for their music? And use that as your sort of your guiding light, your lighthouse when
Yeah,
mixing,
of
I
course.
think.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, the band probably has a vision. If they're paying, a known mixer to do something, then there's something about that particular mixer that they enjoy. So they want that stamp on their record or on their project, if you will.
But if they're paying you, random Joe Schmo who's only been mixing for the last 6 months or a year or something, get to know the band.
Yeah, I think you should, and I think it's important if it's a known band, then if they've got a catalog, then you should go study that stuff.
Definitely.
Study the styles of the engineers and producers and studios they worked in. It's sort of akin to why we kind of started that copycat project so many years ago, because it was a foray into having to understand engineers, producers, and studios. And the reality was that we wanted to get somebody more comfortable in reaching out and trying to talk to people so that they can get an internship. That was really the catalyst of why I created that class, because I thought it'd be fun. They'd have to do some research. They'd have to try to communicate. And the better part was that 9 times out of 10, they would reach out to the band or the engineer or somebody at the studio, and they got back, people got back to them, and they're like, I can't believe it. Band blah, blah, blah just got back to me, and I can't believe the singer just called me and the engineer called me and they want to talk about the making of that record. I go,
Yeah.
cool, huh? So there you go. But
Dude, even I went through this I don't know, this weird phase a couple months ago. I was just like reaching out to random engineers, like engineers who worked on these. I'm a big soundtrack guy. I love listening to movie soundtracks, and man, this soundtrack really hit me. And so I reached out to some engineer. I'm like, hey, I just wanted you to know this soundtrack was awesome, and like this song really meant a lot or whatever. And every once in a while, you get one that writes you back. They're like, these aren't A-list celebrities. They're just guys and girls
they're
who
just folks.
they just
Yeah,
make
they're
shit.
just folks. They're just folks that are lucky enough to be in a room with a bunch of talented folks, and
Yeah.
and they're making music. That's cool, right? Yeah. So anyway, let's wind back a bit here. Let's rewind a little because we've gone way around the horn here. I think that back to the idea of the proper labeling is rule number one. Make sure that you build whatever it is you like in your palette of effects that you like. You should actually have that stuff sort of ready to go. And you should clean up every track and make sure that all of that is dialed in. And then, build your folder tracks, like you say. I mean, I love folder tracks. It's like the coolest thing for me, And I very rarely do I use a basic folder. I just use the routing folders because of the ability to be able to process them.
Yep.
And then you can have them feed. I mean, you could get really crazy, and folder tracks can feed folder tracks can feed folder tracks. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I like to. You work differently, I know. I like to take all my kick drums and I like to put them all into one place. So I'll sort of like get a balance between them, and then I'll put that into a routing folder.
Same.
And then, yes, same with the snare. Take the top and the
Same.
bottom, get the sound you like. Yeah.
Same. Yep. Yeah. Each element gets its own sort of, if there's 2 snare tracks, 3 snare tracks, they get processed individually and then they go to a folder track. And then they could actually have overall processing on the entire group, if you will.
Yeah. So how do you know, which plugins to put into your template? I mean, I would say there's no rule, there's no steadfast thing. For me, it's like I know to add things to a template when I'm tired of instantiating the same plugin with the same settings every single time.
Yeah, agreed. And for me, it's only the reverbs and the delays, and just to make sure that those things are set up in their tempo correct. And that doesn't mean that they should be 100% mathematical based on the grid and all that, because you can tweak a little bit one way or the other on, because it can get boring if everything is like that metronomically rigid.
Mm-hmm.
But have a relative reverb time on your reverbs that actually says something about the tempo of the song.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with your delays. Those should be metronomic, and then you could tweak post, but you should start off, I think, start off with those being metronomic. And then things with choruses and flanges and things that are pitchy and moving things around, if there's sweeps and there's time, all that stuff should be predetermined based on the tempo to start with.
Yeah.
And that's just that part of it for me. And then it's going to be soup du jour for what we're doing with plugins for EQs and compressors and, all that.
Yeah, so I think going from there, the next phase for me is making sure that my listening environment is set correctly. There's not a lot of extraneous noise, and we talked about this in the last episode, talking about loudness, making sure that the audio coming out of your speakers is set to the correct loudness. I'll say that, when I mix, I know that I have an ear for around 78 to 80 dB. That's sort of what I'm aiming for when I mix something. If I get louder than 80, I'm going to probably start pulling it down just instinctually. And if I'm lower than definitely like 76, I'm going to start pushing it louder. So I want to make sure that the sound coming out of my speakers is set to around like 78. Simplest way to do that for me is, grab some music. I don't like pink noise because pink noise it's too loud. Grab some music, grab some similar music, hopefully, and play it out your speakers. Find some sort of SPL meter, download one for your phone, or I like to use my Apple Watch. There's a great SPL meter on there. Get it to 78, and then of course the rule is, like we talked about last time, you don't touch the master knob ever again. Sure, at this point you probably worked in a similar way.
Oh, absolutely. We can go back to the analog days for a minute. I know we keep, I keep going back to that, but the thing is that you have to understand the past to understand what's going on. It was really easy if you were not at a nominal SPL level in the control room to start over mixing things. So what's the first thing that happened? You probably saw that at when you were in New York, where faders are 70 faders, 72 channel console, 60 input console. Faders are creeping up, faders are creeping up, faders are creeping up. What's the first thing that people start doing? Turning down the master fader. So the master fader starts coming down. And
you're looking at your meters and they're like pegged.
Yeah, so now you're crushing the two bus of the console. So you're pulling the master fader down, but then you run out of spec. All of a sudden, your faders are at like +7, +8 above zero, and you can't turn the vocal up enough anymore. You're in trouble. That's kind of an important thing that you're saying about, set it and leave it. But I'll go one step deeper in that a lot of times the tracks that I've gotten from people are too loud.
Mm-hmm.
They're just too loud. They're recorded. They're not clipping, especially if people are in, 32-bit. Nothing's clipping, but they're driving everything to a place that is untenable when it comes to plugins, especially things that are in serial processing. So a lot of times I'll start off by clip gaining everything down, all the tracks down 4 dB, 5 dB, clip gain all the tracks down so that I have some headroom. Because when you put a compressor on, on a vocal, let's say, and it's recorded hot, it's driving that compressor in a place that is not friendly for it, because the gain structure in Pro Tools, or any DAW for that matter, is not the same as the hardware that we grew up with. It's different, way different. So by turning down the fader, you're not turning down the audio file, you're just turning it down to where it's being sent, whether it's a master fader or a master bus or however you want to work. So it's driving the plugin to death. And no matter what you do, it's clipping the plugin. You're in trouble. So what do you got to do? You can't turn it down with the fader. You have to turn the file gain down. So I prescribe to that instantly, the clip gain.
For me, if you have your system set to the 78 dB, like the 78 like you're supposed to, or the proper loudness like you're supposed to, and you hit play on whatever you've been given and it's blowing out your ears, the first thing I don't do is grab the faders and turn them down. The first thing I do is leave my faders at 0, because that's where I want to mix. I want to mix where I have, where I can move the fader the most to make the smallest movement. So I want to leave my faders at 0. I'd like to go through and clip gain everything down. That's my cue that the tracks themselves are too loud, which is sort of what you're saying.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that is such an important thing to do. And it does change the way the rig sounds. Obviously it depends on what version of Pro Tools or Logic that you're running. I mean, things have gotten pretty good these days.
Yeah.
So early on, it was hateful the way things sounded in Pro Tools. That's why I was so anti mixing in the box early on. I mean, even to the point of there was no pan law early on. 0, no pan law.
Oh, really?
So,
oh, that's
yeah,
nuts.
in the early days, there was no pan law.
I had just a few sort of final thoughts. I think before
Sure.
I'm really getting mixing. Whenever I mix something, I want to make sure that I have at least 2 different things to listen out of, not just one set of speakers. I have actually personally, I've found a tremendous amount of success with a pair of speakers and a pair of headphones. In my mind, speakers are the ultimate, the best way to mix anything. You get the most even sounding mix that will sound best across all different spectrums. But having a set of headphones, you can really like dive into the details, hear some different things going on with panning. And also, half of our listening experience now is in headphones or earbuds anyways. Being able to mix on both of those, I think has gotten me a very consistent sounding mix, a very stabilized sounding mix.
I agree. And, these days, most people are consuming with this,
Yeah, with
not
their
even
phones, yeah.
earbuds, they're just listening to their phones. Like, I wish I had a nickel for every time somebody's playing me. Oh, check this out. And they're playing me music over their phone,
Yeah.
or Bluetooth to a very, inexpensive $20 Bluetooth speaker, or I don't listen in your car, your car without everything is wireless, and it's really not, it's not great. But if you can make the mix speak in a substandard system, then you've done your job. So, and don't ever be afraid about listening in mono. Mono is important.
Mm-hmm.
You should listen in mono a lot, and also listen. We used to call it the kitchen test. You just play music through a speaker in another room and listen to what's happening.
You mean like you just walk out of the room, but you listen to it?
Walk out of the room and then, and have the music playing in your living room over your stereo or whatever you listen on, your Bluetooth speaker, whatever it is, and, walk to the kitchen, play it in the living room and then walk to the kitchen and listen to what's going on. It's interesting what you learn from that. Because it's always going to be, the low end is where the problems will be, typically. I mean, for me, it's a little different because I get to work in a real control room every day. I don't have to sit in a house, in a bedroom, or in a basement and try to work. I mean, I've done it and I can do it. I mean, last year I ruptured my Achilles tendon at the end of May and I was laid up all summer. And I mixed a film on my dining room table. Preliminary mixes I laid out and built my mixes. Folder tracks, all the things we've talked about. I did all that stuff on my dining room table. I had headphones and I had a pair of speakers here, a couple pairs of speakers, and the room's pretty dead. And it was interesting with my foot in a cast, which was no fun.
Yeah.
But that was, I did it and I got it to the studio and it actually held up. But I already had the vision of what I wanted it to be.
In terms of where you start when you're mixing something, do you like to start at the beginning of the song, or do you like to start with the loudest or busiest part of the song?
For me, if it's a pop song, AP goes right to the chorus.
Okay.
I go to the chorus. That's where I go if it's a pop song. If it's a rock song, I probably would go to the place where it gets the most cantankerous at the probably last chorus outro or guitar solo area, or if there's big stack of background vocals going into the outro of the song, typically, that's going to be a spot that's the loudest. So it depends on the genre. But if it's a folk song, that's a whole other thing. If it's Americana or some kind of music like that, that's more really acoustic and it's really kind of warm and woody and all that, then I just kind of vibe on the song from the beginning.
Okay.
I don't really go after the loud bits. It depends. It's really about the style of music for me.
Okay.
What about you? You go for the loud section?
I should. I feel like that's the smartest place to go. I often find myself just starting at the beginning because that's where the thing is, and then I'll just hit play.
Yeah.
I'm dropping markers as I go, and so by the time I've mixed it, I've like gone through it a few times. I've probably listened from beginning to end. I have a few different ideas and balance things that I've been doing, but I've, kind of like you, I've gone through a few times. I've moved the faders a few times. I've moved the pans a few times, and I've probably started to like throw in some EQs after 2 or 3 passes. So I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, are you looking for problems when you're in that secondary step of you've kind of got a roughed in mix. It's not, there's really no EQ yet. You're not going to sit there and concentrate on the kick drum or whatever. For me, I tend to, when I go to that next level, and again, you just mentioned drop markers. I mean, we didn't talk about dropping markers, but that's the very first thing you should do.
Yeah.
As soon as you've got your world set up where you have your, at least for me, your basic reverbs that you're going to have set up so you don't have to go digging around, drop markers, and they could be your markers. They don't have to be like verse, chorus. I mean, those should be there anyway. But if there's something interesting, then you should mark it like it's the B part of the verse. I drop a marker for the B part. If there's a segue, a musical connector, if you will, it's not a bridge per se in the sense of a bridge, but it's like a little musical interlude that becomes integral 3 times in a song. I mark those things. I mark every section of the song with a marker and I name it accordingly. And I could call it whatever I want. I might call it, repeat of the B section, second segue.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that mean something to me, They don't mean anything to anybody else at that point. They're places in the song that I've marked because I want to be able to go back there because they're of interest to me.
Yeah, I think, for your question about like, what am I doing in that secondary step? I think when I'm mixing, once I kind of got levels, it's a sort of whatever grabs my ear, whatever I notice immediately, I'm going to take care of it right now. So if it's like, oh, the kick drum sounds really anemic. Okay, I'm going to go in, I'm going to beef it up. It's like, oh, the vocal needs reverb. I put reverb on the vocal like so early in the mix, and it's just because it's distracting for me if it's not there. I'll EQ something. I won't have EQs on every track. I'll put EQs wherever I hear it, wherever I need it. Oh, this needs an EQ. Now the guitar is too fat in the mix. All right, let me take out some of those mids. It's balls to the wall, just a nightmare. Your eyes are spinning, and then 3 or 4 hours later, it's like you're most of the way there.
Yeah, and the other thing too to remember is that so you have this song, let's say that's got this introduction and a middle section, and then in the choruses there's piano, acoustic piano, and you do that thing where you're like, oh, this piano sound is really nice. I'll make it huge and fat and beautiful, and it's the best piano sound I've ever gotten in my entire life. And then you put it back in the mix, and it's not working at all because it's too big. And so
I never solo.
Yeah, and the thing is that I do solo, but I solo after I tweak it, and you'll be horrified sometimes of how horrible you've made that particular element sound, but it works great in the mix.
Yep.
So you can't just make everything. As a young engineer, you tend to try to make everything pristine. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to use any compression because I'm not going to use compression because I don't need compression because I'm so good at my mic placement. Yeah, okay. But you will horrify yourself if you actually EQ something while you're listening to it in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never suggest to be afraid of the solo, but I wouldn't live by the solo, which I think a lot of young engineers do.
The suggestion I heard was never solo anything for longer than 15 seconds because you lose perspective after that. You lose all perspective.
instantly. And especially if you start like, oh, and you go after it, like that's where you start the spiral.
I solo when I'm looking for something. I hear a buzz, I hear a sound.
Right.
What is that frequency buildup I'm hearing? I can't figure it out. And it's just like Shift S down the line as I'm looking, and there it is. And then, now I'll solo while I try to EQ that out to make sure I'm really nailing it.
Right.
But yeah, when I'm mixing, I mean, mixing is you are mixing multiple things together. So you should be spending very little time in the solo world, and you should be listening to it as much of everything as you can.
Yeah, agreed. And the one thing to really be aware of is that the button, the button that you have on a lot of plugins, and it's available in a lot of places in all the DAWs that we use. The round circle with the slash through it, and people say, "Oh, the phase button." Bzzz. Not a phase button. It's a polarity switch.
Yep. Yeah.
That button is not changing the time of those
Yep.
two sources.
Yep.
It's just changing pin 2 and pin 3. So I just think it's important to remember that. But you should definitely use the polarity button in your drum world between the overheads and the kick drum. You should listen to that. And you should check that. And the snare drum and the kick drum and the overheads, you should check that. And the top snare and the bottom snare. And sometimes it would have been flipped in the tracking process. You don't know. You don't know any of that stuff because the odds are you won't know until you listen.
Mm-hmm.
So snare top, snare bottom. Did somebody flip the polarity when they tracked it? I don't know. Was there a cable that was special for that studio that was wired pin 2 and pin 3 backwards? So they didn't have a switch on the console. They just instantly have a cable that's wired reverse like that, and they always use that cable on the bottom snare. That's possible.
Possible.
I have one of those that's wired that way.
A special bottom snare.
Well, just it's one cable, polarity reversed, so that if you need it, it's there. And doesn't get used all the time. It gets used by accident sometimes. You'll say, "Oh, by the way, that cable, the white one with the +3 on it, yeah, that one's reverse polarity." Oh,
So, we should probably wrap up soon. I have one final question for you.
no, we're having too much fun. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Do you like to go through and timeline the drums
No,
like to the
No.
overheads?
no, no,
Yes, okay.
no, no, no,
Good.
no, 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 no. I know
It's
a lot.
insanity.
I know a lot of folks that love that, and I, if I put room microphones up personally, then I put them in a place for a reason, and they are not time aligned with the kick and
Yeah.
snare. They're in another part of the room. Damn it!
Yeah.
I put them there for a reason.
Yeah, the delay between when the original sound happens and when the room sound happens, the delay in sound is what informs our ears about the distance and creates the depth, right? Haas effect.
Yeah, exactly. And the one thing that I think a lot of young engineers have trouble with, and not just young engineers, all of us, I mean, it doesn't matter how many years you've been doing this, is that it's easy to create left and right space. And now, we get into the whole world of immersive, which is a whole nother layer of complexity. Mm-hmm. But in stereo land, I think one of the most difficult things to do and what make good mixes great is creating the front to back space in a mix. And that's the depth of the stage. And you do that by using the proper type of moistening. That's a horrible word. A lot of people go, he said moist. But the proper amount of reverb, or some sort of a room or an environment on some elements and some EQ that actually make it sit back in the mix. And some of the time that takes some aggressive EQ to create that front to back space. And that's the art. That's the trick. Panning something hard left and hard right. Everybody thinks that's the move, but not always. The minute you come off the center with a pan knob, it's actually changing a whole lot from the detent to like 3, 4, 7 numbers if you're going to use it that way. And what's the pan law? Like in Pro Tools, how's it set? Is it 4.5 minus 3.5? Is it 4.5? What is it set at? So those are preferences in the DAW that you can change. How far you move something out.
know your settings.
Yeah, just coming off the center detent and moving something out just a little bit one way or the other. There's a lot that happens there. And then of course it's a logarithm, right?
Yeah.
That from here to there, it's really not that much coming off the detent in the center and moving something a couple of numbers. That's a huge change.
Mm-hmm.
And with some EQ and some reverb or some processing of some sort, whether it's dynamic processing or just distance, then you can actually change the front to back space, which I think is really important.
Yeah. Well, any final thoughts before we
Yeah, we rambled. I mean, we rambled pretty hard.
before we complete?
There's some serious rambling going on here.
There's
sure
at least one good thing in there somewhere.
I'm sure you'll be able to cut something into something and make it interesting.
I'm just gonna leave all you. What are you talking about?
No, you're not, dude. Don't you do that. I think that the most important thing is to experiment and to just, you have to take some chances sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be safe and just, make it musical and, follow a vision. You should have a vision for what you want and try to follow it to the end. I think that's important.
Definitely.
Even if it's wrong, because you can always do it again.
That's true. I was going through some of my my old pictures that I have in Lightroom. I mean, pictures from like over 10 years ago at this point. And yeah, I made a bunch of stupid choices on how I edited those pictures, and it's all non-destructive. So I just went back through and just redid it.
Well, see, that's really funny because in the old days when you made, physical media, there was, whether it was an album or a CD, and you were working for a label, an established client, and they would create 50, 80, 100,000 pieces. You couldn't go back and fix that.
Mm-hmm.
In the world we live in now, you post something tonight and tomorrow you're like, a week later, I don't really dig where the vocal is. You just upload it again.
Yep. I mean, no. Let's get it right the first time.
Good luck.
Yeah.
All
right. Well, thank you very much, Alex. This has been a lot of fun.
It was my pleasure. It was my pleasure, Luke. It's always good to hang. And we'll horrify Tyler. So.
Oh, I'm sure he'll come running back.
Don't let that jackass talk on my podcast again.
No. Well, thank you very much.
Well, my pleasure. I hope it was. I hope there's something there you can use.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe. We put out new episodes every other Thursday. If you liked what you heard, take a second to give us a review. Every review helps new listeners find us. If you'd like to support us, you can find us on Patreon. We have some perks for our new subscribers and plans for more as we continue and grow. If you'd like to join the conversation, find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching Mixed to Tape Podcast. If you'd like to contact us, write us at mixedtotapepodcast@gmail.com. We can't wait to hear your questions. Thanks, and we hope to see you next time.